Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this Vital Transformation webinar in collaboration with DIA. My name is Dwayne Schultes, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Europe has traditionally excelled and been a world leader in biotech, but since the introduction of the EMA's Advanced Therapy and Medicinal Products Regulation in 2007, half of the approved cell and gene therapies that have come to the market have failed in commercialization and have subsequently been withdrawn from the EU market. This webinar today will discuss the mounting challenges to Europe's biotech sector, and we'll try to offer some tangible suggestions as to what we need to do to ensure that the EU maintains its historic competitive lead and advantage in newly developed therapies and make sure we bring them to patients. Now, part of the activity that we have with these webinars is we like them to be very and highly interactive. So there are a few tools for you to interact with us. We've had 100 people register, and they're coming in fast and furious now. So if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can. You can dial in with your headphones or the telephone if you're having connection issues. We've provided roughly 20 toll-free dial-in telephone numbers, so you can try and reach out to us. If you're having issues with your Skype, use mic and speakers connections. And we will be taking questions and asking polls, so please keep an eye on the question log. You can open that up and pop a question to us, and we will endeavor to answer that question as soon as we can. And as I've said, we'll also be asking 3 polls, and we very much look forward to having your input on this webinar. So I'm very pleased to be joined by 4 of the leaders internationally in this space. These are 4 thought leaders in biotechnology, and we're very grateful for their participation. Firstly, I'm joined by Eduardo Bravo, who's joining us on the phone from the United States. He's the CEO of Tygenix and the chair of the European Biopharmaceutical Enterprises Board of Directors. Hello, Eduardo. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Dwayne. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're also joined from the United States by Joep Muyers, who's the partner and venture capitalist at Life Sciences Partners in the United States. He's calling us from a very snowy Boston, I understand. Joep, thank you very much for your participation, sir.
You're welcome. Hi, Dwayne.
Thank you. And sitting next to me here is Holger Adelman. He's the Senior Vice President and the Managing Director of DIA in Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
Hello. That's great. Hi, Dwayne. Hi, everyone.
Thank you, Holger. Now, we understand that Thomas will be joining us. He's currently indisposed with a meeting at the CHMP. So we look forward to hearing from him as soon as we can, and he'll be joining us sort of midstream. So with that, I'd like to turn over to Holger, who will be presenting DIA's BioVenture Day, as well as some of the issues that they see occurring around Europe in biotechnology. Holger, I turn the floor over to you.
That's great. Thanks, Joanne. That's great. Yeah, I've pulled together a few thoughts that I had around that from a lot of discussions with biotech folks and investors, but also some of the research that has recently been done by the EBE, the biotech branch of the FPR, which have really investigated the biotech ecosystem and found that this is at large dysfunctional and not in good shape. Why is that so? First, of course, you have to ask the question, why healthcare, isn't it? I spoke to quite a few investors, and they said, well, we rather go for investment in IT. There's a lower risk than in healthcare. Maybe that's true, but maybe it's also true because many venture capitalists are not specialized in healthcare, not able to fully judge the quality of the science and innovation potential of an asset, which in fact, of course, determines success. There's also a notion that there is too thin a spread of funds across many different assets rather than focused investments in top science and top innovation. So that's really difficult. Funds in EU, on the other hand, are kind of, some funds are bound to countries, and this naturally creates barriers in funding as well. In Europe, EB has found there's a lack of business experience with entrepreneurs. This is also kind of complicated by the fact that there seems to be a lack of collaboration of top scientific academia with business schools. That means these 2 elements that make a biotech successful really don't get together. Particularly in the EU, many biotechs are at a very early stage, and there's only a couple of mature biotechs in existence. Why is that so? There are several reasons for that. There's a movement of key assets out of the EU for later stage development and market capitalization, in particular to the US. So this kind of drain of business opportunities causes also a drain of assets from the EU stock markets. the lack of realization of big revenues in the region is a consequence. And as a consequence, there's a lack of trust in building with regards to return on investment for venture capitalists in the EU. So then there is a reluctance to really touch big money to fund beyond the phase 1 readiness, which is what they currently are funding a lot of in that area. Phase 1 readiness is attractive for big pharma to buy an asset, but the return on investment for investors is remote. But this is basically also taking biotechs away from maturation when they get included in big pharma's portfolio. In the US, on the other hand, there are quite a few mature biotechs, and there's a really healthy competition between IPO and acquisition. That's a completely different story. The EBE comes to a conclusion, and I fully subscribe to that, and the healthy and functionally ecosystem for biotechnology needs mature biotechs that manufacture and sell their medicines so that the return on investments can be fully capitalized, and there is a lot of funding availability from venture capitalists who see that the money can be realized in Europe. So there is also, I would like to broaden it a little bit out, and would also like to have a few bullet points here on the access to innovation in general. There's a recent research driven by the European Parliament by Gottman et al., which was released in September 2016. And it came to the conclusion that present pharma R&D produces few innovative medicines for diseases for which no treatment exists. This is really sad. On the other hand, you see highly parallel micro-innovation in established treatment areas. That means many people go for established targets because the risk is lower, but that is an issue because you have many small step kind of innovation that requires reimbursement for the pharma companies of 1 to 2 billion, and causes big pressure on the health economic systems in terms of reimbursement. So then you end up with all these kind of small step innovations on the market, and payers find it very difficult to remove medicines from reimbursement lists once they are there, other for reasons than safety. So this is causing big burden on the health economic system. Novel treatment paradigms, such as, for example, the hepatitis C eradication as a short-term and high-cost treatment, did not fit at all the existing health economic models which we experienced. And of course, in cancer, there's big questions around ethics versus economy. What is a meaningful treatment benefit for a cancer patient? So that all are kind of factors that are determining the access to innovation for the patients. With this, I would like to stop my introduction. Would like to hand over back to Duane.
Thank you very much. You've touched on a lot of the issues around market access, incremental versus large jump innovation, as well as liquidity. Eduardo, you're the CEO of Tygenix, the first company to have a successful ATMP that has gone through the EMA process. You've recently withdrawn that product from the market. As well, you're also the representative and the chair of the European Biopharmaceutical and Enterprises, EBE. Can you give us your opinion of what Holger just mentioned from both the standpoint of the industry as well as a very innovative biotech?
Okay, so first, thank you very much for inviting me to participate, and thank you for the very nice introduction, which I think touched on most of the issues. I mean, again, if we look at the ecosystem, which from EBE we've mentioned as something that we really need to recuperate from, investing on a company and making it big, I think that requires three key things. One is having the idea and the science. And if you look at the successes and where a lot of the innovation that today is, of major importance in the biotech and pharma industry, that has certainly been initiated in Europe. So we seem to be pretty good at getting the ideas and the science. Then you need the teams, and I think that here, again, because of the third point that we will mention and the lack of companies that have been established, there is really some shortage of people that have, fail or succeed a few times, and that bring more experience into developing a company from the very beginning. And most importantly, I think is this idea of the funds that a company will need to be tapping into. So public funds at the very beginning for the early R&D, I think that Europe there, although we have some issues with country-specific things and so on, but I think that again we're pretty competitive there. Then this specialized VCs and having you on the panel, I think that he can give probably a much better view on this sector. But I honestly believe that we have funds and that there are pretty specialized funds that have sufficient money to fund the companies that are at that stage. I think that what we're missing, and it's a problem for those private VCs and it's a problem for the companies, is the next tier, which is either crossover funds or really specialized biotech funds that will have the money to push the company from the private into the public sector and help the company in the public sector to really develop into these first phases of growth. And without those specialized funds, the companies are forced to go to generalist funds and retail investors, which do not have the knowledge nor the funds dedicated to the space to have this medium-term horizon and desire to take the risk after exploring the options. So at the end, we end up in a market that you have the VC's money, you develop the company to a certain stage, and then you need to go either to a fragmented public market, because again, NASDAQ is one for all, and you have hundreds of peers, or in Europe, you need to decide which small public market you need to go for. And then to get there, there is a shortage of specialized biotech funds and a shortage of those crossover funds that will help the company's transition. And you see some companies then taking the decision to move straight into the US capital markets, or after a few years in the European capital markets without real access to some of those funds to take the company to the next stage, move to the US. That's exactly what Tagenes has done with the recent IPO in the US, hoping that being present in the US will facilitate the entrance of specialized US funds to help grow the company to the next phase. So sorry for this long answer, but this is how I see the key issue around funding biotechs in Europe.
Eduardo, thank you. And just touching on that, I don't know if you've seen this data. I did chart it up anticipating that someone would touch on this. We went through last year and we've analyzed the 200 mergers and acquisitions that occurred in biotech in 2015. This is vital transformation data that we compiled. And you can see, you mentioned that you folks have decided to do an IPO in the US. This is after your experience in Europe. And, you can look at the evolution of the market here where between US and Ireland essentially acts as a proxy for US due to tax purposes. I mean, you're looking at 75%, 80% of the global M&A activity is occurring around the US market. So we're really seeing a huge transition in where the funding and M&A activity is going internationally, and this is future productivity. So Joe, I'd like to bring you in now. Your job is to fund, make money for your investors and see a successful biotech company through phase 1, phase 2, into phase 3. How is your firm dealing with the liquidity or the lack of equality and liquidity between the two markets, between the US and Europe, and how do you see this affecting Europe long term?
Yes, thanks, Wayne, and also from my side, many thanks for the opportunity to join this webinar. Maybe before I go into your question, I was intrigued by some of the things that Eduardo was saying, and I agree actually with most of it. So for those who don't know, LSP or Life Sciences Partners, we're an investor group that only invests in life sciences. We've been around for more than 25 years. We invest as a venture capitalist, but we also invest as a public market investor. Have been doing the latter activity for about 9 years. So the way I look at it is that I would agree that in Europe there are groups out there that specialize in this sector, LSP being one of them. I would not necessarily agree with the fact that these funds have sufficient money. I'll tell you why. So LSP is one of the larger firms in Europe. We just raised our latest private fund, which was the largest ever raised in the Benelux, but that's still about 280 million, which if you compare that to an average VC fund in the US, where I have been based now for the past half year. I used to be in Amsterdam for the past 10 years with LSP. That's still pretty small. And I also feel that that's not only the case in the private side, but also on the public side. I would fully agree there with Eduardo. So actually my responsibilities within LSP focus on the latter. I do look very actively at publicly traded companies in Europe and in the US. And I would agree that there is a lack of sophisticated funds in Europe that look particularly at small mid-cap listed companies. Now, if you were to ask, would that perhaps be an unattractive space? Is that a reason why people have ignored it? I would very much argue against that because actually some of the most innovative, high-quality companies that are based in Europe, I feel, are small mid-cap listed companies. In addition, typically they're more advanced than the private companies, meaning that there's some real data to assess. They can be already in quite advanced clinical trials or potentially already on the market. Return-wise, it's been very good for us. In the past 9 years, we've generated 25% on average every year for 9 years. So that's not the issue either. I feel that the issue could be that people have just not, and I'm talking also, from the EU side, have not put up sufficient funding for this particular space. So there has been a lot of, for example, European Investment Bank funding going into the VC side. That has not been the case for public market funds, and I feel that that's a gap. That's an opportunity, because I'm quite convinced that with more capital available for small mid-cap European listed names, they may actually stay in Europe much longer. I mean, I fully understand Eduardo's move to the US, because there we have a lot of sophisticated funds with billion funds under management looking at public market companies. So that's just one observation I wanted to make, and then I'm happy to talk about the liquidity question you asked, Dwayne.
Sure. Well, so where do you think the breakdown then is occurring, or that Eduardo is seeing as someone running a company that had a therapy? Is it in the lack of reimbursement then that's causing the hole to emerge? Are you seeing funding, liquidity being sufficient up to phase 2? Because there aren't many phase 3s launched in Europe. That we know for a fact, because the vast majority are going to the US. So you can certainly make money going into phase 1 and phase 2 with your exit, but then there's the question, how do you get that successfully to phase 3 to see a European company emerge? And so I'll go to you first, and then Eduardo and Holger, I'd like your feedback on that too.
Sure. So I don't think there is a magic formula as to where investors make their return. We at our firm have made tremendous returns on companies in phase 3. We've made it with companies that had their product on the market. We've made them in phase 1 and phase 2. Now, typically, as we all know, phase 3s tend to be much more capital intensive than phase 1, phase 2 studies, and that capital just typically is not available in Europe, particularly if you're on the public market side. So what happens? Either you strike a partnership with a large pharma who can back up that phase 3, or you try to fund it yourself, and that's a challenge in Europe. And then typically quite a few companies would go to the US, because there the mentality is, well, look, we're deep-pocketed investors. We have hundreds of millions, if not billions, to put to work for small mid-cap public names, and we want you to hold on to the asset through phase 3. We'll pay for it. We don't want you to partner with large pharma. Quite a different mentality than what you sometimes have to do in Europe, because you just don't have access to the capital required for phase 3. But from an investor point of view, again, there's no magic formula. I'm equally happy to invest in companies with unencumbered phase 1, phase 2 assets as phase 3 assets, and prefer, typically in many cases I've preferred later stage products simply by the fact that the risk profile is lower and the chance of success are higher.
Yeah, exactly. It's been, once you get out of phase 2, you've been de-risked. Now, Eduardo, from your perspective, how do you take that? Certainly the VCs can make money, but that doesn't help you sell a product in Europe. How do you see that? Is there a disconnect there? How are you dealing with that?
No, I think that it goes back to this idea that you have the funds to take the company to a certain stage, but then the stakes to either take a product to the market yourselves after phase 3, and that was the story of in the past of I would say the old Digenix with CondoSelect, or what has happened with our own CX601, and that we've partnered in Europe with Takeda, and that we're now taking to the at least through the phase 3, second phase 3 by ourselves. And I fully agree with you. Is this difference between going to more or less generalist funds which are much more risk averse in Europe that will ask you for further validation and that would prefer to have a lower return with lower risk associated, or very specialized funds that will take the bet, and a lot of them will pass on the idea because they will not be convinced, but those that get convinced by the business proposition that the company is trying to convey will put the necessary funds. And I always say that the conversation in Europe goes with, if I give you less, can you still get me to the milestone? When in the US, the conversation goes, if I was to give you more money, what else you could do to make this company bigger? And this changing the approach in which in the US, the funds have their own portfolio. So at the end, each of the programs, each of the company, is like if in a big pharma you were running a portfolio of R&D projects in different stages. That's not happening in Europe, and that makes it much more difficult for European companies to fund themselves to the point where they can take the products to the market.
I'd like to follow up on this. I have a survey poll I'd like to send out to our audience. And so what we're asking people is, can you please answer, what do you think are the largest barriers to commercialization in biotech in Europe? And so we have a poll running, so if people could please answer that poll, we'd very much appreciate you answering. We have over 50 people out there, so we'd like you to chip in. So Holger, you are, essentially what DIA is trying to do is set up a new session to facilitate the discussions we're having here with you and Eduardo about trying to commercialize biotech successfully in Europe. How do you see DIA's role in trying to facilitate this?
I think DIA is a broad neutral platform, so I think DIA is the right place to bring stakeholders together, not only the biotechs and the pharmas and the VCs, but it would also be a natural place to connect with the other faculty that normally comes to DIA meetings, such as regulators, payers, and patient advocates. So that's why I see the added value coming in from DIA.
And so that you have an event that you're going to be hosting, just quickly get a plug in while we're running the poll.
Yeah. So we hosted our first BioVenture Day in Glasgow on March 28th. That is one day prior to the DIA Euro meeting, where we have some exciting topics and exciting speakers on the agenda, and we try to focus on a few things there. Not only on funding issues, but also on the question whether we have to redefine innovation to really cope with access to innovative drugs, both from R&D funding and also from the reimbursement side. We have top-level speakers there. We have exciting panel discussions. Will be highly interactive format. So I think you have provided the link in the invitation to that webinar, isn't it? So I appreciate if people can have a look at the link.
Yeah, if you look at the PowerPoint we have up, it says DIA Global. You can go and register there. So we just closed the poll, you and Eduardo, and I'm very much looking forward to your input on this. I would have thought hospital exemption would have scored higher, and I'm sure, Eduardo, you're going to have a few things to say about that. But what I suppose not a huge surprise, HTA processes themselves, as well as the level of member state reimbursement, scored first and second, and 63% of our attendees voted. Eduardo, first, what do you think about the results of the poll? How does this reflect your life at Tygenix?
Well, I'm not in disagreement. I think that maybe how the question was written had an effect. The question was general to biotech, and for non-ATMP products, the last two are all are not relevant. And if we look at biotech commercialization, I think that the barrier is indeed the reimbursement. I think that if we look at future success after getting reimbursement, in the case of ATMPs, definitely hospital exemption will come very high, simply because unless we have clearer rules, it's difficult for some of the investors to put money in those companies, and it's going to be difficult for some of the big pharma companies to really jump into the space, and it's going to be difficult for smaller companies to have the success that is needed to bring more money into the company. So it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And you, what do you feel about that from your perspective as an investor?
Sure. So let me start with a very positive comment. Science and the foundation of everything we do in Europe is at par with what's happening in the US. I'm very convinced of that. There's some fantastic science on the clinical and on the academic side ongoing, And maybe just again, to try to make that a bit objective, in our latest fund, Bristol Myers Squibb became a strategic investor because they want to have access via us to early stage, high quality and innovation scientific projects. So this is not my worry whatsoever. What is my worry, and that's based on a lot of interactions I have as an investor with management teams who have assets that are later stage and are looking to commercialize and see where they want to prioritize, right? We have to wake up about this because Europe is losing its second spot to Asia very rapidly. I meet a lot of teams who will tell me, look, commercialization, top priority, US, clear. Second, Asia. Europe is just too difficult. It's too much of a patchwork and everybody needs to do its own analysis. Let me try to make that a bit more clear. I understand that different countries and different HDAs do their assessment. I understand that. I also understand that they look at this, they have finite budgets, and you know, you cannot pay a high price for everything. I fully understand that as well. You want to negotiate on prices, I understand. What I don't understand is that within a country and even within regions and hospitals in a country, people have to redo the risk benefit of a product that just went through the scrutiny at EMA. Somebody explained to me what a local hospital in whatever country in Europe can do above and beyond what EMA does with all its advisors, with its very professional chimp. How in the world are, you know, why are we wasting time on this? I don't understand. Again, I understand that people are looking at prices and budget impact. I fully understand, but this part of redoing the risk-benefit analysis, somebody has to explain to me. It's a frustration because, again, we better wake up to this. If this continues another 5 to 10 years, Europe will be third. People will go to Asia as their second pick for commercialization.
I'd like to follow that up. Holger, your previous life at AstraZeneca, this was stuff you dealt with on a regular basis. How do you reflect on what you have just said about the competition, increasing competition, regulatory and as far as market access competition between Asia and the United States and Europe? How do you feel?
I feel exactly the same. I mean, it's quite a few years ago when I was doing the respiratory and inflammation Asia strategy for AstraZeneca, and we can really see that that the market was growing rapidly there. And people really in Europe don't see that, you know. I had that first-hand information. I think, remember back in 2009, I think it was already, when we're talking about the top-tier hospitals in China, those hospitals that had really access to where patient had access to modern care in the top-tier cities and top-tier hospitals, you know. And people were talking about how many of the Chinese people, of this 1.3 billion at that time, had access to modern medicines in principle, modern asthma medicines. And we came to the conclusion that this was 394 million. Imagine that. That's double the size of the American population that had already 2009, 10-ish, had access to modern asthma drugs. You can see how big that market at that time already was, and that is growing. And you can imagine that this is going far beyond a very disharmonized Europe with a complex regulation.
And as well, if we look at what the Japanese have recently done, you can see that they have put in a highly accelerated pathway, similar to what the rumors are around the new FDA head of the U.S. Trump administration, talking about almost an accelerated and adaptive pathway around a accelerated license, specifically targeting iPS cells in advanced therapies. I mean, Eduardo, from your standpoint, hearing what we just heard from Holger and Joop, how do you feel about the fact that, you know, the Japanese now are trying to really see this as a competitive advantage, almost from the standpoint of an industrial policy? Is that what we need?
Well, I think that, first of all, let me say that I'm 110% with Joop's previous comments. And by the way, I think that even the analysis should be done at the European level. But then, sorry, Dwayne, going back to your question, definitely, I think that, you know, what Japan has done on the cell therapy space is a very aggressive move in which a country takes the decision that they want to lead a certain space and will do, I would say, almost whatever it takes. You know, it was thanks to the work of the Nobel Prize and all these advances on the iPS cells space. But they've gone, you know, a step further. They've looked at, you know, public funds. They've looked at, you know, the industry. They've looked at, you know, accelerated pathways. I still have to see how those products will be reimbursed when you have, nice safety data, but you have no proof of real efficacy. I'm not sure that payers will be willing to commit a lot of money to reimburse for those products. But again, I'm sure that there are, issues that they will need to tackle and refine. But I think in terms of commitment, that's, I think, what we're lacking is this decisive plan in which, this is what we want to be. And I do not know what we want to do in Europe. And unless you have a very clear plan, focus on very few things, and maybe advanced therapy should not be one of them. But you need to make the decision what you want to do and then go for it. What you cannot do is try to, help every single sector in Europe and every country wanting to have their own small biohub, and then going to your question, every region within a country deciding that they want to have, the Silicon Valley of the biotech industry, because at the end nothing happens. You don't get the concentration of companies, you don't get the concentration of knowledge, you don't get the power in terms of money, and then those are companies that take 10, 15 years to develop. So you need a very consistent and sustained effort to really make an impact.
I'd like to follow up again this idea of the unified HTA. How practical, and this is for you and Eduardo and of course for Holger here, how practical is that going to be given the political reality? I mean, isn't that sort of, given the hostility towards centralization of power in Europe right now, just from the political activism standpoint of France, the Netherlands, what just happened in the UK, how practical is that going to be politically to actually implement a unified HTA? You, from your standpoint, is that even feasible?
Yeah, I don't think we'll have a unified HTA anytime soon. I mean, every country has its HTAs and has its procedures and has its way of looking at it, and then has its budgets at the end of the day. And so even though that as an idea would be, I believe, a very good one, I don't think it will happen anytime soon. What I'm after is that once an HTA has made an assessment, why is it then necessary that still after that it's a struggle, at least in certain countries, to get your product reimbursed and used if it has been, if it has faced the scrutiny of a highly professional regulatory agency, of a highly professional HTA? Isn't that enough? Aren't we done then? Doesn't that mean, you know what I mean? So, but that's something that annoys me because then still a lot happens within regions and hospitals, and that's the part I don't get, to be honest.
There was research published that I'm included in an article that I wrote on LinkedIn last week. It's taking on average 12 months longer for therapeutics that have approval to reach patients in Europe than the United States. So it's an extra year. And that's an extra year less of sales. It's an extra year less of treatment for patients. So obviously something needs to be done. It's just a question of what, Holger, you were chomping at the bit to jump in. What's your opinion about how much can we unify and how practical is it?
Yeah, I mean the HTA processes and criteria and the whole HTA world is of course tied in with local country budgets, and this is really the difficult situation. And the priorities on reimbursement are different in different countries. But I think what we could probably do is really to agree on some kind of minimum effectiveness criteria, where we say what is really a minimum effectiveness increase in some of the key diseases that we can agree across Europe. I think that is probably something that can be done rather quickly.
Mm-hmm. We just had a comment from Mark Dooms, who's listening. Thank you, Mark, for your comment. He says Europe is a patchwork of different social security systems. So Mark is expressing some feeling that trying to unify that is probably not going to happen. But thank you, Mark. Eduardo, what's your feeling on that? Is it doable, or is it politically a non-starter right now, just with what's going on, even in your country, in Catalonia?
No, I think that we need to separate two things. One is doing the HT assessment, which I honestly believe can be done centrally. The other one is what are the thresholds and what are the decisions in once you have the data on reimbursing or not a certain product, or on which modalities, on how you pay for it, and so on. But, they've come to an agreement on, what are the technical hurdles, and they've come to an agreement in other sectors, in banking, on the way you need to calculate your resources and your balance sheet and so on. So I see no reason why there should not be a central agency that will do all the HTA calculations for the product and decide, again, I don't know what is the right one, if it's a quali, if it's a however, but at the end, it doesn't make any sense for a company, for a small company, that you need to produce 27 different HTA models, each with their own nuances. Let's face it, and then for a decision that is taking a lot of times on, very political grounds, most of those HTA models at the end are full of assumptions. So, garbage in, garbage out, I think that you need the assessment, I think that you need the work, but I don't think that doing 27 provides any better value, and I don't think that one is substantially better than the others, and that we could do with one HTA agency, and then political decision on the countries, what do I pay for, what do I do not pay for, what is reimbursed, how much do I reimburse, and that's a different issue.
Okay, but I'm going to go to Holger here, but before, so we have another poll I'd like to roll out, and we're talking about trying to fix the commercialization issues around biotech, and this is ultimately, who do the audience feel should be responsible for fixing this? Where does this solution ultimately lie? Is it with the member states? Is it with patients? Are patients going to have to push this? Is this industry? Is this people like Eduardo who's going to have to do this, or is this actually going to come top down from the European Commission? So please, for the listeners out there, people listening to this webinar, please chime in. We look forward to your feedback. Now, Holger, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I just want to comment on what Eduardo said. I think that's very true. I would also like to bring a slightly different aspect in that. I think biotechs, like all big pharma, now really need to build a compelling evidence generation to value demonstration chain right from research, because that will in the end help to define the value proposition of the drug very early on. That can prepare the discussions with the payers, but also would certainly support the evaluation of the quality of the research and of the level of innovation by the venture capitalists. So that, however, needs experienced R&D folks, and they seem to be reluctant to move from big pharma to biotechs in Europe. I see much more movement of people that want to take a risk and say, hey, I have all this experience from evidence generation, value demonstration. I can show a kind of an inventor, a kind of a biotech inventor, really what it needs to take to build this value story, But I see a reluctance in Europe for people to move out of the comfort zone of big pharma to do this biotechs.
Well, and also, again, if we know that there's a lack of sort of late-stage liquidity, there's higher risk, harder to exit, so there's going to be a lot of reasons why it may be difficult to make it happen culturally. The U.S. is more, I think Americans accept risk as part and parcel of the culture, but then the culture is more forgiving for failure as well. I mean, there's more mechanisms there. I've posted the poll results now. Kind of an interesting, sort of a three-way push here, with a slight edge to, again, we're picking on the member state governments a little bit today. I suppose that's where we see a lot of the issues. So essentially, that we feel the problem lives with the member states, but it's also a role for the industry and the commission. So I'm going to go to you first. How do you see, does this surprise you, or do you see that this is about what you'd expect? I mean, sort of not much clarity. It's basically a problem for everybody is what we're saying.
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused with how the question was asked. Do you mean to ask who's responsible for fixing the issues we see in biotech? Okay, clear. Well, to be honest, my view would be that in that case, there's a big role for the European Commission. And I understand very well what the dynamics are in a lot of countries and what's going on at the moment, but still, this is something that is a bit of a pan-European issue, and I guess that's something where the EU Commission, what they look at, what they're for, right? So I do see that they would play a large role, and clearly it also is something that member state governments then in the end need to agree with and implement, and so I understand that people go many ways on this question, but I feel that at the end of the day, and it's also something that Eduardo briefly mentioned, look, there is an issue here, and it's not in the interest of Europe what's happening at the moment, and therefore European Commission and member states better take action. So I'm not surprised with the result of the poll, Dwayne.
Eduardo, does this surprise you, or what are your feelings on this?
No, I had my first reaction was the same as you, which is, at the end, no country in Europe by far has the size to become a significant, attractive market on itself. Not even Germany, which is probably the biggest one. We've just heard from Holger the amazing figures of some of the eastern countries, not to mention, the US. And we're talking about EU commercialization. So either we believe that we want to make Europe a market, and then, for me, it's really the Commission role, or forget about EU commercialization. Let's call, commercialization in the different European countries, and then it's going to be a country-by-country decision. But I think that then it will be completely impossible to have the companies that we want to have that will compete for leadership in subsectors in the biotech.
So Eduardo, if we look at this then from the solution, Holger here, essentially a DIA could play that role for trying to facilitate a solution at the European and member state level. Holger, is this what you're trying to do with your BioVenture day? Is this what the objective is?
Yeah, I think we have quite a few regulators and also HTA people there. And I think I look forward to that discussion that will take place certainly at the BioVenture Day. I personally believe that I'm really with Eduardo, with you, Pierre, that I think the European Commission needs to take a significantly stronger role here.
Thank you. As you know, we are taking questions from the audience. So people who are participating in the webinar, please go to the question bar and submit a question. We have a few questions here that have come in. I know we've been running polls, but I'm going to take a few questions here from the audience. This is from Asuni Soni, and this is regarding Brexit. With Brexit, is there a concern that the return on investment will be lessened because the cost to market will rise as the market is even more fragmented and smaller, given the EU is much less in size than, say, the US? So does Brexit and the fact that the UK is the third largest market in Europe impact the return on investment? Eduardo, what's your concern from a biotech? You're working with Tygenix, you've done an IPO. What's your concern about Brexit? Does this affect your return?
Oh, I think that the biggest concern there probably is for UK-based biotech companies. I think that for it's a pity. I'm very much against what has happened, but at the end we have one market which is significant, like it's like the UK, but we will treat the UK as we treat Canada, or another market that is not part of the European Union, and that's it. I don't think that it will have a huge impact for European-based biotech companies.
I think, Eduardo, picking up on that, one of the comments I've heard from members, and it's a shame Thomas has not been able to get in, one of the comments we've heard from the CHMP is that, the UK currently right now provides roughly 25% of all the regulatory data and decision-making information that flows through the EMA. So I think from our standpoint, we're very concerned just about the knowledge base that's going to erode. Who do you see picking up the mantle then if the UK is out from the regulatory side, from your work, if you're trying to bring more products to market? Do you see Germany or France would need to step in?
Well, I think that again it would depend on the different specialities. I think that the fact that the EMA was in the UK created that pool of knowledge as well around, and people can move. So I think that a lot of the knowledge will move, and exactly the same as we use knowledge from the US for our filings. There's no reason why we cannot use knowledge from the UK. In the advanced therapy space, to be honest, I don't think that the UK was the most advanced, or there are other countries which are as advanced as the UK. So I see there less of an issue. I think that is going to be a big thing for the industries where the the agency moves to and how much disruption that produces. But the question was on anticipated return on investment for a European-based biotech. I don't think that it will have a big impact.
And you, from your standpoint, you're an investor, you're dealing with the numbers, you're seeing market size. Are you concerned at all about the ROI from some of your investments, early stage, mid stage, given the Brexit?
No.
No.
Not at all.
Okay, well that's definitive, thank you. Holger, how is DIA handling Brexit?
Well, it's going to be interesting because we have a nice coincidence because the Euro meeting is happening in Glasgow on March 29th, 31st, which is exactly the time where we heard by Theresa May the clock will start ticking for the negotiations between UK and Europeans. So we tried to channel the inevitable discussions at the Euro meeting, and we had created a dedicated session to discuss the Brexit implications. It's going to be an interesting one because we have spoken to several stakeholders, and they come with an educated kind of informed opinion from their different groups, so they really will reflect back, and we have regulators present there as well, so they will really reflect back whether it's R&D, whether it's pharmacovigilance or whatever, they all come back, market and access of course as well, they come back to the panel really and report from their kind of faculty what kind of impact that's going to have. So that's going to be very enlightening discussion, I think.
Yeah, I look forward to being there. We've had a question come in from Barbara Lopez-Kuntz, the CEO of DIA. Thank you, Barbara, for your note. Barbara's questioning, and again, this goes back to the data I showed earlier about the huge migration of M&A activity to U.S. in the biotech space. The U.S. is gobbling up a lot of IP. Right now in the U.S., and this is Barbara's question, there's a great stimulus to new company generation around the research parks associated with major academic institutions, and Barbara points out Kendall Square, Cambridge, MIT. Are we seeing this model play out across Europe? Eduardo, again, Tygenix spin out of KU Leuven. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think that we can compete. If you look at your figure on M&A, and maybe Jude has better figures, but I would guess that the market for these M&A is 80-20, whatever, 80-20 US to Europe. But if you look at the number of companies which are public, it's probably at least 80-20. So at the end, this is just a reflection of what happens earlier. If you look at the number of VC money, as Jude was referring to, again, probably it's 80-20. So at the end, this is just that, you put the money in very early on, and it ends up paying on public markets and then M&A. So that's normal. Now, on this thing about the public institutions and the industry, I think that we're very good in Europe. I think that what we're lacking again is this decision in Europe on which are going to be the biopoles that we want to create, rather than having, as I was saying, each country trying to create their own, and then within the countries, each region trying to create their own. Imagine that instead of having, West Coast and Boston, every single state had tried, and they did, and most of them failed. But, I don't see, Arizona trying to become the biotech hub of the U.S., and then, Texas doing the same, and then North Carolina wanting to do it. But, thinking about Spain, I know of several regions that are, doing huge investments trying to become the biotech hub for Spain. We had Oxford, Cambridge, London. I think that was great. I think that is surprising the amount of companies in the Benelux area, and we've benefited from that. I think that there's another hub in the Nordics, but there's a lot of investment that has gone into France as well. So it's a pity that we don't try to pull all that together in less spaces. So there will be more concentration. And then, of course, we will need to do something with this fragmentation of the public market. So at the end, we go back to this idea that we want to create a European market, but then we have 27 realities. And within those 27 realities, in Spain at least, 17 sub-realities. So unless we start looking at Europe as one market, I see that it will become very difficult to compete.
So we've just heard Eduardo articulate the fact that the fragmentation is being driven by public policy in many ways and not necessarily market interest. How do you compare the Cambridge Square, Boston, MIT space, that's where you were located with your company, versus your experience in Amsterdam? I'm sure keeping an eye out to some of the circles around Leuven, Ghent, which have done very well from a return on investment standpoint. How do you compare the two, and how do you see them evolving?
Sure. So yeah, it's interesting indeed. I had been based in Amsterdam for 10 years with LSP, and I've only been here for about 6 months, and still a lot of things I need to see and explore. But to be honest, this is quite amazing, really. Cambridge area is an amazing ecosystem, and frankly, I don't think we have that yet in Europe. Now, the way to get there is, and I don't want to be boring because Eduardo and I seem to be agreeing on a lot, but again, I agree with Eduardo. Because it's a matter of concentration. You don't want a situation whereby any country, and what you said about Spain, Eduardo, as you know, copy-paste to the Netherlands, my home country, that is just not very constructive. I think that there are a couple of very good areas in Europe. Eduardo mentioned a couple. I would mention clearly everything that has happened around the VIB. I think they've done really, really well. That's the kind of thing that I like to see as well, because from an investor perspective, it makes my life a bit easier as well, right? If I, can link myself to a couple of high-impact regions, and in the US, I think there are mainly three. It's West Coast, Boston, and Research Triangle Park. Now, if in Europe we would have 2 or 3 things like that, that'd be fantastic. And it's a matter of prioritizing as to where we do it, and then putting more funding available also from the European Commission to really get those parks going, and try to discourage, as difficult as that might be, some of these local initiatives to put their city up as the next region to come. Even though that may take 10, 15, 20 years. So, I also feel very strongly about the need for high-impact centers. Maybe one thing I also wanted to say, because I don't want this call to be too negative, I also feel that there are quite a few things happening in Europe that I'm actually very excited about, and I just want to mention 2, if I may. Firstly, I am very excited about this trajectory where EMA gives parallel advice with an HTA. I think that's exactly the way to go. They offer this scientific advice to get the HTA involved in the early stage. I think for, particularly for a company that's still planning its studies and everything, to get that early feedback, not only regulatory-wise, but also from the HTA side, is excellent. The second point I would mention, and this is something that I as an investor had overlooked until a few years ago, that's the patient perspective. I am quite aware of the fact that, again, EMA has done well in terms of involving patients and getting a council of patients who give their input. Maybe something similar could be done on the payer side as well. Now, maybe the knee-jerk response is, yeah, but these patients just want everything. Ask EMA. Ask how good these people are. Ask how well they know their space, how well they are aware of the fact that there are finite budgets in there. The patient voice is unbelievably strong and very, very balanced. And this is another reason why I'm excited about the March 28th event, Holger, because we'll also have people who are very experienced and very good people from the patient side participating. This is a perspective that's very, very powerful. The regulators have picked up on it. The investors, I believe me, at least LSP, we are picking up on this very strongly. And maybe on the payer side the same should apply, because, and I'm not saying that it doesn't apply at all, but maybe in an increased way, because gosh, these people can tell you a lot about what's important to them, and at the end of the day, these are the people using whatever innovative things that we are developing. So those would be some more positive spins on what I'm seeing in Europe.
Great.
Yeah, I can fully subscribe to that, Joop. I mean, just coming back to your previous comment about the consolidation, the need for consolidation of the biohubs, I also see that necessity in Europe. Literally in every country, almost every big university has its own kind of science hub, and this is highly fragmented and doesn't attract, of course, the gravity to really do big fundings. It's kind of highly splitted. So I think one way to consolidate that would be, for example, that the biohubs kind of concentrate on a certain disease or therapy area. That would really help to concentrate also the people, the specialists in one area. Because look, for example, in Cambridge and in Manchester, they both do almost all targets in cancer. There's not even a separation between the targets that they do. So a little bit of everything is probably not the solution for that. The other thing is the payers. Yeah, I think it would be great if on that side there would be some kind of harmonization of voices, because it's almost impossible for for pharma, for example, to react to a fragmented payer view. This is really necessary. And I find when I spoke to payers, I always find this very enlightening. We had a case where we were presenting the payer with a development plan where we had chosen symptomatic kind of patient-reported outcomes. And interestingly enough, both the payer and the patients, they were more interested in activity-based PROs, because the payer quite rightly said, I'm not interested how much cough or sputum a patient produces, but I'm interested whether that patient can do his household and whether he can climb his stairs, whether I have to give him someone to help him, but this was exactly a large concurrence between the patient and the payer. So it was very enlightening, and sometimes you find that the payer and the patients are closer than you think.
So, thank you. One final question. We're almost out of time. And this is for the panel. And I'm going to begin with Eduardo from the industry perspective. Eduardo, if you had one thing you'd like to have happen in the next 6 months to aid EU-based biotech, what would you like to see happen?
Can I dream? I will have one single European market.
Okay, so there's your magic wish. Joep, from your perspective, European investment, what would you like to see from a EU-wide decision that you could implement in the next 6 months?
A dedicated amount of money dedicated for early and mid-stage companies, listed companies, publicly traded companies, small mid-cap companies that would be invested alongside professional investors, preferably actually managed by professional investors, to increase the war chest of what we can invest in small mid-cap companies in Europe.
So something like a European Investment Bank initiative driven by the European Commission to help VC, essentially.
Not VC. It's all correct except for the VC. I would actually dedicate that towards the public market, so small mid-cap European names, so investors investing in that space.
Excellent, thank you. And Holger, finally.
I would like to see a strong signal towards harmonized HTA processes and criteria. For example, agreeing for some key disease on some minimum effectiveness increase criteria, because that will be really be understandable by the politicians, by the patients, by the pharma industry, and this will pave the way for a better market access in Europe.
Thank you very much, Holger. Just again to remind everyone, we'll be having a BioVenture Day. Most of the folks who are on the webinar today will be there, as well as people like Luca Pani and other international specialists, Bettina Rill from the Melanoma Patient Network. It should be a great day. Vital Transformation is pleased to help support this. Holger, thank you very much.
Thank you, Eduardo.
Eduardo, thank you very much for your time on the phone, sir.
Thank you very much.
And Joep, pleasure meeting you. Thank you very much for your insight.
Thank you very much. Nice talking to you guys.
Thank you. And with that, the webinar is closed. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Okay.
Fine.
Are you happy